So we've got the negative emotions, we've got the positive emotions, and as I said, the negative emotions, we are 5 times more likely to ruminate over. So by that I mean that when we have those negative experiences, when we feel like crap, when we ruminate, we tend to build storylines around them as well. Like, why is this happening to me? Or, how can I change this? Or they're at fault, or whatever it might be. There's all sorts of sort of things that will help justify to ourselves why we're going through this thing. And those storylines are actually rarely 100% accurate. In fact, I'm not sure they could ever be 100% accurate. They're a perspective. And they are also very unlikely to be helpful. We can't help but pick them up often, but they are usually things that actually spin a web around us that we find harder to move away from. So I'm sure we've all been there where we go, oh my God, but what if I did this? No, why did she do that? All this sort of thing. And it makes it horrible. It really is the sort of essence of suffering. So, and of course, this is quite tied in with physical pain as well, because physical pain often leads to emotional pain, and emotional pain can lead to physical pain. You can feel a pain in your gut, or you can hurt yourself. So there's all those things that sort of are interwoven within it. But the thing that is the sort of commonality of all of them is this sort of creation of a narrative that brings on suffering. Okay, so with physical pain, you actually have a physical manifestation, tissue damage, usually, of some sort or another. With emotional pain, it may lead to that in one way or another, but generally speaking, the mind part, that what you might think of as a mental thought form, like a thought that has the weight of an emotion behind it. Yeah. So these two become very intertwined, and we basically have an emotional response that may be triggered by a thought or may be triggered by an action, but it gets whipped up by our minds and takes on this sort of weight that the emotions give it. It has power. So it's like, I always think, but any emotion, the word emotion, I think of E for energy and motion. It's energy in motion. It's how we experience these things. So, and we can have these coming in various ways. So there's 3 main sort of sources for emotional pain. And that's really whether it's come from the past, the present, or the future. So we will usually experience them all in the present, but the roots of them are often on those different timescales. So emotional stress is very much what we were talking about when we were talking about stress on week 2. So I say something nasty to you, you say something nasty back to me, and we get into the blah, 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 and it builds up into something that takes on emotional weight and becomes really horrible, and it sort of gets out of control. I can't think where I was going with that. But it's basically, it creates a trigger point often where there's a point, when we talked about the choice point, where you can decide, if you're feeling in, if you're listening into these things arising, then you have a chance to basically nip it in the bud before it takes the reins from you. Yeah. So that feeling in, that sensing, which again goes back to week 1 and week 2, the body scan, that being aware of your physicality, the response in your body that's being triggered when something emotional sparks you off. Yeah? Now, the roots of that are often actually in the past, although we very much experience it in the present. And that, I would say, is if we look at this, when it says feelings when your needs are not met, and you replace that with, so it's needs or desires, I would say. Yeah. So as a baby, we have hardwired into us the need for safety and food and comfort and that sort of thing. So that's built into us from birth. But also, on top of that, we have a storyline. We're probably not aware of the details of it, but a storyline that's lent to us, or we learn through a combination of experience, of the things that happen to us, the things we're told by our friends, family, society at large. And this basically becomes a storyline of our life, how our life should unfold. You know? And that might be, just taking a classic, but obviously not a universal one. Well, I'm going to, I expect my life to turn out that I'm going to be rich and famous and have a beautiful spouse and loads of gorgeous children who look after me in my old age, and I live happily ever after and never die. So that's your sort of fantasy line that's not actually something that you consciously think, but it's bits that you've picked up through life. They're all the positives. You don't want any of the negatives thrown in there. So as soon as something triggers the fact that you're not going to get your way in this particular moment, so you've just been called in by your boss on your dream job and they've told you, you're fired. Instantly, insecure, feeling that you've lost your perfect job, how are things going to go on, blah, 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 blah. So you feel this rage or this sadness rise up within you. There's a trigger because you're not getting your storyline filled the way you want it. Yeah? So that sort of is a classic sort of source of our momentary emotional stress. We then have depression. And I'm not going to oversimplify. I've never experienced clinical depression, so I'm not going to try and pretend that I have. But depression generally is, I tend to think of it as being when you've had enough knocks in your life that those key points in your storyline of your planned life have been knocked out of place, and all the energy you've invested in your dream life looks to be crumbling apart to one degree or another. All that energy you've put starts to feel like it's seeping away, and if that happens enough over a long enough period of time, you can lose direction, lose sense of purpose, and feel like shit. There are all ways, there is a way we're going to come to deal with all of this. And then there's anxiety or fear, things that are going to come in the future. Now they're usually also, not always, but usually based on, again, experiences we've had in our lives, the things that didn't go the way we wanted, and we're fearful that they're going to go like that again. And so we project onto the future the possibility that things will turn out bad. We have no idea of knowing whether they'll turn out bad or good, but we tend to do that. There are obviously all sorts of other fears. There are irrational fears, and there's a whole spectrum of strength of fear. So I'm not going to try and again diminish that because I don't have the personal first-hand experience in that. But I do believe that apart from perhaps severe conditions that require medical attention, they're all basically, to one degree or another, treatable with the same process. Okay? And the main way of doing that is very, very simple in a way. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's very, very simple, and it is awareness. It's the first thing that we do is bringing our awareness into what the problem is, catching it as it's happening. So if you're starting to feel worried about, let's say somebody who's driven on a long journey or catching a plane, a loved one of yours is catching a plane, and you decide to sort of build up this image, oh my God, what if the plane crashes? And you spin this story about how awful things could be. In the moment of recognition that you're creating a storyline which actually has no foundations, you can start to bring things back to the present moment. You can feel into that fear. So just as with physical pain, we're not primarily looking to tune out, because that generally doesn't help. But we are being kind with ourselves. So two things. One is always feel free to tune out, just as you were saying yesterday, earlier, Nicola, about your experience with tooth pain. So feel free to tune in and out as you can cope. But also, as they say, it's best not to try to learn to surf in 60-foot waves. So don't try in the, as, I don't know, it's a bit cruel to say, when you're having your wisdom teeth pulled out. Don't think, I don't want medication, I'm just going to do it with mindfulness. So, I mean, they may not be pulling out anyway. So, I think that start with smaller things and start to become aware of your capacity, your ability to deal with small emotional pain. Yeah? So when you're feeling just a little bit disappointed in something, bring your awareness to it. Now, just like with physical pain, in fact, there are far more than this. There are, I think, probably hundreds of different subtle definitions or types of emotional pain. So there's lots of hues and lots of degrees and strengths. So really feel into those initially minor emotional things. What have we got here that's, feeling unhappy, maybe feeling embarrassed rather than, humiliated, or unhappy rather than grief and sorrow. There are some of these that are generally milder things to cope with, to bring your awareness to. So does anybody remember how we go about doing that? How we bring, what the sort of approach to our awareness is?
I was just going to say awareness.
Yeah.
What do you mean by when you feel the emotion, become aware? Because I don't. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so right now, you are probably not particularly aware of the feeling in your right toe on the ground, but now that I've said it, you are.
But how does that sort of help? Just as say I'm panicking, I don't know, my nan's and me doing this, and I'm just making up scenarios. I do that a lot, thinking of the future.
Yep.
That's literally what I get worried about.
So anxiety, you're planning for the future, worry for the
I
future.
constantly just think the worst scenario for the future. It's not really about the moment.
Yep.
I don't really worry about. I don't know. I just think. I think of a non-imaginary scenario. But how do you I don't get how becoming aware of that will help it. Surely it just make me more frantic, the fact that I'm thinking about it.
Well, that's why I say start with things that are small and feel your way in and out. But when you feel into something, when you really feel in, without sort of calling it panic or anxiety, but you just tune into the sensations, to the physical manifestation of it, notice how it makes you feel, and then really become that feeling. In becoming the feeling, in becoming the sensations, so your whole awareness goes to that sensation. That's what I mentioned before. We have this thing in Zen called Narikiru, which is you basically totally become as one. You cut off everything else other than that feeling. You totally become the sensation. That your whole awareness goes to what it feels like. It might be butterflies in your stomach. It might be anything like that, and you move your entire awareness to it. And in doing that, you stop the storyline. You move away from the storyline, stop giving it power. And that storyline is the thing that's giving suffering, because it's layering extra shit on top. Yeah? And as you do that, you also notice that those feet, because you're totally present with those butterflies in the stomach, you notice that actually it's not a fixed, permanent thing. You notice that it starts to change. You experience it in a different way, and you can start to allow it to dissipate. So there's an expression. There's a Zen master called Obaku who said, get your head around this a bit, that which sees suffering is not itself suffering. That awareness within you that observes this manifestation of suffering, this butterflies in his stomach, for want of a better term, it notices that it itself is not suffering. It can feel the sensations, but it's not suffering. It's just absorbed in the sensations. And then it notices those sensations change. And that's the same in anything, even in the throes of terror. You can still notice, I'm experiencing terror, and terror feels like this. Yeah? But I wouldn't suggest you start with terror. Sorry?
A bit of a hardcore one.
Yeah, it seemed a little bit unnecessary. So the emotional pain basically unfolds differently when you bring your awareness to it. But me saying all of this is one thing. The only way you will know the truth of it is to experience it, and that involves you during the course of the next week spotting little things.
Yeah. It's kind of when you give something a name, you take its power away, isn't it?
So when you
give something a name, when you see it, you take away its power.
yeah.
You take back the control.
Yes.
That kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, again, what we often think of emotional as well as physical pain almost as being an enemy. It's pain. I don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if you remember, I use the analogy of the screaming baby in the corner of the room. It needs your attention. The reason you're in pain is because something is wrong. Now, there may be something physically wrong, but the chances are the thing that is wrong is that you have spun a storyline that's BS around an event, which looked at objectively, the event is just the event. You know? When I look back, so if I give you an example, I remember being really upset. This is way before I met Liz, my wife. But I remember in my late 20s absolutely falling head over heels in love with this girl, or at least in lust, I'm not quite sure which, but definitely very attracted to her. Went out with her for about 8 months, it all went dreadfully wrong. I spent about 2 years feeling really, really shit about it, thinking, oh, God, I was going to marry her, I really loved her, and you sort of whip this whole thing up about it, thinking, and she was so perfect for me, and I'm never going to find anybody else that's as good. Well, I mean, my life took a much better turn. Yes, in that moment it felt dreadful, but actually the fact was I just wasn't with her anymore. I didn't know what the future held for me. That was all made up. A moment by moment awareness of how you are right now is all that you need. So don't forget, mindfulness is about feeling right now. The storyline is a projection.
I used to have in a less scary scenario, I come from a very big Irish family, and they're very boisterous, very loud, and by proxy I'm quieter and sort of more, although I'm loud in England because people tend to be quieter in England. I've always been the quiet church mouse compared to all of those. And we always had loads and loads of big family parties. There's always like 30, 40, 50 people turning up. And there's all sorts going on. There's cards going on there, there's music going on there, there's whatever. And everybody has to do a turn. Doesn't matter what, you can stand up and say poem, you can sort of tell a joke, you can do whatever. And I can sing. So everyone always pressured me to sing. And I couldn't do it in front of them. They were all willing me, and I literally would shut down. I couldn't speak, my voice would disappear completely. So, we'd get to that point in parties, and I'd go hide upstairs and do all of that kind of stuff, until I thought that had gone past, so I could, come back down and join it again. And then eventually I sort of said, I just have to kind of, because it's all well-meaning, it was me putting the fear on it, because they were like that. So I had to embrace the feeling of fear, and sort of like, watch their faces and what was really coming my way. It wasn't a sort of you sit, it was kind of like, just let's have a bit of fun. And they were all willing me along, and I've managed it a few times, not all the time, but if you put yourself in the right headspace, you can actually just get on with it, and it's over in 5 minutes, and you actually enjoy it, and then they enjoy it because they see you enjoying it, kind of thing. So that's the first time I ever tried to sort of analyse what was going on, because I was like, I was kind of ruining the party.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a
felt
water,
that way,
but,
yeah.
you know, it's just doing this.
But even and bringing your awareness to, so what I touched on that you said then was that, you know, so you were aware of how it made you feel, it made you close down, but also you were aware afterwards that it made you feel good having done it. That, you know, it made
Yeah, but I realised it was I didn't like being the centre of attention. I enjoyed taking part, and I would sing with the rest of them till 3 in the morning, but I didn't like being singled out to do it.
Yeah.
But I managed to work it. So I just looked at it to see what it was.
So you see that, though that to me is very much that sort of, you know, that innate quality of who you are, maybe spun through your childhood experiences of being part of a big crowd and not wanting to fight to get to the top of the pyramid, but just happy to quietly go along in the shadows and do your own thing, and being hoisted to the top, very uncomfortable, very out of your natural comfort zone. So in a way, out of your established pattern or storyline of life. This is not what you think of as making you happy.
Yeah.
When you're pressured into doing it, it even becomes worse. But the thing is, it's this resistance. It's feeling into the resistance of why you're doing that, and then feeling in that when you've gone beyond, that feels like freedom.
It is.
So this last weekend on our retreat, we were doing loads of things that were really, really interesting for this. And actually, we could do it now. I haven't got time. We did one exercise, actually, where people would... I'll demonstrate. Any volunteer? Quick demonstration?
You look at me, aren't you?
Well, that's whoever wants to.
No, look the other way.
Look the other way. Anybody else?
Oh,
Yeah, okay. So you stand up. This was an exercise in being aware of how you feel internally. So hold your hand like this. I'm going to touch your hand, but just very lightly like this. Now close your eyes. And what we're going to do is I'm going to move you around this room. I'm going to guide you just with the very lightest of touches. So I'm going to try and follow where I'm following you. And you've got to trust me that I'm not going to bump you into something. Okay? Yeah? So we did this as a big group of people, all in pairs, walking around the room, avoiding each other. But do you notice how you feel inside? Do you feel secure? Do you feel ill at ease?
I feel like I'm going to walk into something even though you're not going to walk into something.
Yeah, so there you go. That was that. I mean, that's a very short expression of it. But just when you close your eyes and you do something like that, then you become your other senses become more heightened. So you can notice that I'm not sure if they're comfortable. What am I going? You know, you're aware of that sense that you could be about to bump into something. So you're aware of those fears and things. But after you've done it, you're like, oh, well, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
You know, and that sort of noticing of those differences, noticing that you can safely go beyond, noticing that when you feel into an experience directly and you basically become it, everything else drops away. All the storyline drops away, and you're just left with the sensations. And as I say, you know, we're not looking at labeling those sensations as good or bad or whatever. They're just sensations. That butterflies in the stomach. It's not like, oh my God, I hate this feeling, I've got to get it to stop. It's just like, what does it actually feel like? For some strange reason, I seem to have managed to just induce it by thinking about it right now. but you know, what does it feel like? And it's sort of just, it is just what it is. And you can be quite curious about it. But then you notice it seems to be going there. Yeah? So all of these things, awareness transforms them. Your awareness of things happening within you, you see them change. Because everything in life is in a process of change. Nothing is fixed. Nothing at all. The floor you walk on. You know, we have a term in Buddhism that we refer to as emptiness. That basically all form is emptiness. And emptiness imbues all form. This was once a tree. Well, this was once a thought of a seed of a tree. It became a tree and was then chopped down, cut down into planks, placed on this floor probably 80 years ago or something, and in 500 years will probably have rotted to dust. No? Nothing is permanent. Everything is in a process of change. However imperceptible it may be to our senses on a moment by moment basis, and that includes our emotions, our feelings. And as we start to pay attention and see the truth of that, and see that actually not allowing them to be whipped up by our minds, by our imaginations, and not, and the same with depression, not really allowing this sense of, and if you become aware that you're depressed because something wasn't real to start with, it's almost always your storyline that's at fault. You know, one of the things that, as an example of that, I would say, is a sort of contrast to what I said about that dream life, the sort of Walt Disney happily ever after type of 2.4 kids and all of that sort of thing. The sort of physically opposite of that is that my Zen teacher, Zen Master Daizan, when he came back from being, well, he's still a monk, but when he spent basically about 30 years as a monk in monasteries in England and Japan, and when he came back from Japan, he came back with nothing but a bowl and a change of clothes. And he went to a lighthouse on the southern tip of the Isle of Wight, St. Catherine's Lighthouse, I think it's called. Have you? Yep, thank you. And he walked from there, obviously got a boat ride across, up to a lighthouse, I think it's called Point Roth or Cape Roth or something like that in the north of Scotland. 770 something miles. And he walked it in about 2 months without any lifts, but also without any money. And he didn't allow himself to take any money. The only things that supported him on his way was the generosity of strangers in the way of food and shelter. So he couldn't take a fiver to go and buy himself food. They had to either give him food or give him shelter, and everything else was just a question of him making his way. So not knowing, moment by moment, when he was going to get his next meal, whether he was going to be sleeping under a tree in the middle of a thunderstorm or in somebody's bed. You know? And that ability to willingly put one foot in front of the other with nothing to your name, basically, but living off the generosity of strangers is, for most of us, quite a terrifying thought, but for him, a totally liberating. I mean, he'd done it before, but you know, it also a totally liberating experience. So those things that we think that life owes us, that if we don't have, we have good reason to feel depressed about. It doesn't have to be that way, you know. There are always other stories that you know, other truths that can unfold in our lives, you know. But noticing it's always easier to notice these things early in the process. I mean, I've noticed loads of times when I'm feeling a little bit down on a day. I've also noticed, which is much easier to notice in other people, for example, my wife's aunt, who has had a mental illness and has had, you know, proper clinical depression, and she has wound herself down into such a depressive state that the real sadness is nobody wants to spend time with her because she's really not good company. So that makes her life even more depressing. So, you know, when that spiral of negativity takes over your life, it's much, much harder to extricate yourself. So by being aware and learning to tune into that awareness all the time safeguards you in the future much, much better. Bring these techniques into bear early, as soon as you notice something, and go, I'm not going down that route. I'm going to sit with this experience right now, notice it change, become at one with it, and move on. Do something else. Maybe do something else that will energize me. Let's do some Tai Chi. Let's do something that, you know, grounds me. Walk barefoot in the park. You know, go for a run. Do any of those things that nourish you, that you like. Get out, get energized, get back on track. But it's the awareness that's the first thing that triggers your ability to do that. Does that all make sense? Now, there are 4 basic foundations of mindful awareness. And that's basically ways or places that we become aware of aware of and where emotions are building, I suppose, in this instance. And that is what we call mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of bodily sensations, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mind objects. So, mindfulness of the body. You have this, and the mindfulness of the sensations in the body. If you think about it a bit like, you imagine a play that's on the stage. The producer of the play has an awareness of the play taking place, but the actors are the ones actually doing the movement. So in the same way, you have this awareness of your physical form. You have an awareness of your posture, maybe, of your sense of health, of your heart's beating fast, and that sort of thing. But you also then have the awareness of pain or discomfort or the need to move and things like that. You have drivers within the body. So that's more like physical sensations. And they tell you quite a lot. So, your posture will tell you quite a lot. Am I feeling happy when I'm sitting like this? If I'm feeling this tension in my shoulders like this, am I likely to be feeling happy? A lot of resistance. So awareness of the body, awareness of the bodily sensations, really good signals that you are not at ease. You are not at flow, at one with life. You are resisting something that you don't like. You don't necessarily need to know or analyze what that thing is. You just need to become fully aware of it, fully aware of how it's exhibiting itself in your posture, in your physical sensations. Yeah. You can also become aware that there may be a mental counterpart to it. So you may become aware of the fact that you feel stressed, mentally stressed, or you may become aware of the storyline, which is mental objects, the images or narrative in your head going, oh, she said this, or he said that. What I would say is that although you may become aware of you may become mindful of your mental body and your mental activity, that can be a perfectly acceptable place to become aware of it. Bringing things into your physical presence is the easiest way to process things. Because if you stay in the storyline, what do you think is going to happen? Yeah, well, you're going to build another storyline onto the other storyline, aren't you? You're going to be like, well, I suppose if I stop thinking about how she said that to me and I said that to her, but she did say that to me, and I don't think that was fair. And I know I'm thinking about this still like I'm trying to be mindful, but it's still, do you know what I mean? It just gets woven in. So instead, bring it into the body, bring it into pure sense.
Find that you find what you're looking for, so where you put your attention. Like if you're sort of saying, oh well, you're arguing there, she's there, you're actually, that's all you're going to see from that person. You're looking for those signals and you're reinforcing that storyline.
Yeah.
Whereas if you sort of step away from that, you see other sides of it.
Well, you might, but I mean, it's yeah, you might do, but I mean, you might do it as you let go of it. You might allow other thoughts to arise, but don't forget. I mean, all storylines are false, ostensibly. There isn't such a thing as 100% truth. We're far too more. Life is far too nuanced for that. But yes, you can allow more space for other. We all know that when we've had in the heat of an argument, we say things that we definitely don't mean, and then when we reflect on them afterwards, we go, I didn't really think that. I really don't mean that at all. So yes, you bring a more balanced perspective to things when you come away from it. But just in the way of processing it, coming into the physical feelings, into the physicality of the expression of that emotional experience, by resolving it physically, by bringing your attention to that screaming child in your belly, in your fists, in whatever it's exhibiting, bringing your awareness to it again, listening in, like, what are you trying to tell me? But not analytically, not mentally. It's just, all you're doing is paying attention. A baby cannot tell you why it's screaming. And in the same way, you're not looking for an intellectual answer. You're just paying attention.
You've got to try everything and then one of them will work.
So you just listen in and experience what it is. In doing that, the storyline starts to drop away. The more you just stay present with the physical sensations, and then you notice that those physical sensations are also not fixed, and they start to move and settle. Yeah, you catch it early. So we're tuning our awareness to noticing the triggers, to noticing the sensations that are exhibited in our body, fully becoming those sensations, our awareness totally absorbed, and cutting off the storyline, basically. Yeah? Does that actually make sense?
Yeah.
So you can come to it by the mind, but it's just a bit of it's a dangerous place, the mind. You know, well, it just can lead you to, it's a brilliant place, but it can also lead you down, very complex places. So the other thing we're going to look at is the other side of the coin. So is the part that's also important with this, which is acceptance. So it's the awareness and the acceptance of what is happening. Yeah. So that's the sort of quality that we bring to this. So we're not trying to change or stop ourselves having emotions. Emotions are what make us human at the end of the day, and they are generally trying to tell us something. So we're not trying to stop them, we're allowing them to have expression. We're not trying to turn you into robots. So, these emotions come, we see them, and we just become, as I say, we take hold of the reins more, so that we are the masters of the experience with them. And I think that we have to sort of be aware that all emotions have a value in that sense of being a messenger to us, so even the ones we don't like. They are there telling us something. There is a very compelling argument that actually we learn most from the things that we resist. If we really pay attention to the things we don't like, they're telling us something that we really, really valuable lessons. If we ignore them, then they just keep coming round and round and round and round in our lives. But we pay attention to those things and we start to really, really learn. So I advise you to, feel free to just explore in those horrible things as well as the slightly less pleasant ones, but just take it easy. Now, when we talk about sort of accepting emotions we don't like, we don't really mean that we're going to be walked over like a doormat. Okay? We're just accepting that these are things, the triggers of things that have already happened. We can't change that. So we're not going to. I had somebody online the other day, I was doing a meditation class, and I was reading them a passage of a medieval Buddhist text, which basically was saying, I can't get to it. Anyway, it was basically about equanimity, about finding this middle way of not allowing things to whip you up. And a woman afterwards said, well, I don't quite understand. She said, I got really annoyed with my daughter the other day because she killed a wasp. And you're telling me I shouldn't have got upset about her killing something. And I said, well, did you getting upset about it change anything about the fact that the wasp was already dead? She said, well, no. I said, well, did it serve a purpose, you doing that? You actually probably alienated your daughter. Now, could you do something about it? Well, this wouldn't probably help the wasp, but if you wanted to, you could treat the wasp, the dead wasp, with respect and carefully move it and put it on the grass or whatever you wanted to do, and you could talk kindly to your daughter and say, all life has meaning and you shouldn't, it would be, isn't that a dreadful thing to do? But to get emotionally embroiled in something that's already happened doesn't serve a purpose. Doesn't mean that you cut these things dead, but just becoming aware of them. It's a nicer place to live when your emotions aren't running wild through you. Doesn't mean to say that you can't choose to allow them to, but who really wants to allow anger to run riot through their system? There's a nice 13th century Sufi poet Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam, and Rumi was a beautifully insightful 13th century poet, and he wrote this called, so you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to be reading this in medieval Arabic, and he says, "This human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." Does that make sense?
Yeah, easier said than done.
Sure, but as with all things, it's the doing of it that makes it, it's the starting of doing of it. There's nothing, in almost all Zen practice, there is nothing that really, all of these words are dust in the sand compared to practice. Practice is everything. There are so many things in life where, you know marketing skills or legal skills or, sorry, but whatever they are, where you learn by rote so that you can produce them and you can act in that in a career. Zen is not that at all. There is really very little value in these words other than as signposts. The value comes from living this, by gently steeping yourself in it more and more and more until you become someone who is so tuned to their life experience, so awake and aware. I mean, the name Buddha comes from the word bodhi, which means awake. The Buddha was just a man who became so completely awake to his own existence, to life around him and within him, that he knew the truth of who he was and what life was about. He just woke up to it. It's like waking from a dream. You start to, we walk around so much of our lives with our heads up our asses, but we do. We walk around with daydreams, A number of times I keep almost bumping into people because they're walking around doing this. We're not here, present. This is where life happens, right here, right now. And if you're missing out on it, you're in a daydream. If you wake up to the reality of your existence, wake up to how you feel, how you think, what's going on within you, and what's going on around you, your life takes on new purpose and meaning. And you start to act in a way that brings you naturally more ease and more joy. Because you know how to redirect the stuff that's causing you misery. Because you're spotting it. You're aware of it before it even takes hold. Yeah? There is another system, I'll write down, which is a sort of expansion of the awareness and acceptance model, which is called RAIN, the acronym RAIN, which just breaks it down a little bit more. So, the first stage of this awareness and acceptance, the R, recognize what's happening. Yeah? Within yourself, you are. That's the initial part of awareness is recognition. That's anger arising within me. Yeah? Allow your experience to be there. Don't try to fight it. The awareness is all you need. If you're aware, in the moment of anger, if you become fully aware, your mode of action will start to change. You don't need to try and control it. You know, there is not a need to suppress the anger. As soon as you notice that this is anger, in this moment I feel anger and anger feels like this, it starts to take care of itself. You notice it as something that is not you. It is something that is running through it. And as you notice it as that, it starts to lose its power. Okay? So you can allow these things to happen. All you need to do is to recognize it. But then, as it continues, investigate how it's expressing itself. Investigate the pain or investigate the experience. Yeah, what does that butterflies feel like? Not necessarily as the same words, but just like really becoming one with it. You know, you just really become at one with it. You investigate as if you've never experienced it before, but you probably never have that clearly. Yeah. And then lastly, which again comes kind of out of that, is non-identification. So once you have clearly recognised and investigated what's happening, and you've allowed it to have its presence, you've allowed yourself to feel that there, and you've become completely at one with it, you see it as not being you. You see it as an experience going through you, and you disidentify from it. And then it's kind of dissipates. And you've learned in the process what that feels like, so that the next time that signal comes up again, the next time that event occurs again, you're primed. You know, you've been through it, you know that you have the power to determine how you choose to respond to things. So it's you, as I think I said on week 2, you turn from unconscious reaction. You say something nasty and I go back at you. It's an unconscious reaction to a conscious response. I don't know why you said that, but you said that. Do you see what I mean? There's an ability to influence the situation, to take the reins back under control. So emotional pain is quite a difficult one, but we all have patterns as well. So if you have any thoughts of things, I don't know whether you have any emotional triggers in life that you think of, that you experience regularly. If you do, you're welcome to write them down and keep an eye out for them. But you know, emotions are often things that are sparked quite sporadically, but bringing your awareness to ones that perhaps you're more prone to. Now, it might be just the actual type of emotional response. So you might think of yourself as being somebody who gets angry a lot, or gets depressed a lot, or worries a lot. You know, we often see ourselves in those certain ways. They're generally not true, but we can start to paint that picture of ourselves. So, you know, if you know that those are traits that you get caught up in, start keeping an eye out for them. Any questions? There is also in those papers, there's a sheet of various bits of scientific research that's been done on the power of meditation and mindfulness to deal with emotions as well. It sort of backs all that up. And the last thing I was going to say on that is that as you become more, I feel very sexist saying the master of your destiny, but mistress does sound a bit old. As you become more the master of your destiny, you become a happier person, and you actually become a more useful person. You become somebody who can influence other people, because we all choose to migrate towards people that give us what we need. Somebody told me this is a dreadfully sort of dismissive and generalising thing, but someone said there are 2 types of people in the world. A lot more than 2 types of people, but using plumbing terms, they say there are radiators and there are drains. And energetically, there are people who are more likely to give you a, yeah, I feel good, and the, oh, do you know what happened today? Oh, I've got to tell you all about it. That drain the energy out of you. So, it's the more you're aware of your world, the more you are able to live in peace and harmony with your life, the more you exude that, and the more you become genuinely useful in the world. One of my greatest heroes, although that is only based on a 1970s or 80s film, Mahatma Gandhi. You know Mahatma
We had to
Gandhi.
watch that film in year 5. We
Fine.
watched Gandhi in year 5.
I watched that quite young as well.
That does seem quite young.
They had to send out like loads of forms home and stuff, and our parents had to like give consent to us watching it in year 5. Yeah, so I'd have been like 9.
Oh, you'd be 9. That does seem quite young, I must say.
Yeah.
Brilliantly acted, though, but great story. But Mahatma Gandhi, yeah, well, especially the massacre at Amritsar.
The bit where he goes on a hunger strike and his head gets slammed against the wall.
Yeah.
Never slept again.
Well, Gandhi said, as a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him.
Oh, I remember that. I remember
That quote, or the smashing of the head against the wall.
I remember that quote really well. I don't know.
Do you?
I feel like I've seen, obviously I've watched it, but I've
Yeah.
seen that somewhere since.
That's good, quite I like that.
Yeah. So we can really take control of our destiny. All we've got to do is have awareness and acceptance. Allow our storylines to change. Allow our storylines to develop however they do. One foot in front of another is all we take on this journey in life. Imagining where we're going to end up, nobody knows. And thinking what could have happened if things had been different, what does that serve either? And getting caught up in the moment of an emotional whirlwind, we've got no sort of ability to make choices in life if we do that. So this is all about you leading a life that's happier and better for you. Just got to be aware and allow things to happen. All good? All good. Excellent. Should we do a bit of meditation?
Yeah. Can I read the moon?
No. Oh, all right. I'll let things happen.
Story of the meditation.
Anybody got any questions about any of that?
I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
It's strange though, because I've seen a psychologist like 3-4 years now, and that's basically just everything of what he said just in an acronym. But like it took me 4 years to understand that. So it's really interesting. I always think if I did this first, would I have understood it as much as if I'd like done that other stuff? Because that to me is like I know exactly what that means. Like that is I've done that and I get that. Whereas I don't know whether I would have ever thought that like before.
It's kind of catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like which one? You know.
But that's 4 things to remember. If you want, just remember the 2: awareness and acceptance.
Yeah.
Because in the acceptance, if you're aware and you allow, it kind of everything else starts to take control. It's our lack of awareness
The
that makes it.
identifying thing is like really interesting because I feel like initially it was like the awareness and acceptance, but then I feel like it's really important to remember that that's not like you as a person. It's so easy to be like, oh, that's not you. Like, when you say it so casually, but that is actually really true. Like, if you feel something, then it's not your natural state.
Yeah.
Everything is temporary. Like Elsie always used to say that. That's kind of one phrase. Everything's temporary.
Yeah,
Everything
totally.
is.
I think it's also difficult that you're almost being forced to identify yourself as this person, this kind of person, that kind of person, constantly, whether it's to your peers, you're going out, oh yeah, she doesn't like clubbing, or she doesn't like
Yeah.
this, or you don't like this, or you're always doing that, or you're a reader, or you're whatever.
Yeah.
You're constantly being thrown like things that you're supposed to qualify.
Yeah.
You could be all of them and none of them in the space of 2 days,
Yeah.
But people, once somebody sees you as that one thing,
Yeah.
it's very very hard to shake it off. It's like, but then it's very hard to grow beyond that sometimes. So you have to
Like removing self, yeah, that
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
just because you liked clubbing last year
Mm.
doesn't mean that that's all that you are.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Some people just like a neat box.
The thing is, what you find as you go down this journey, as somebody who's only in the what I might call the what would you call it, the sort of the baby peaks of the mountain range sort of thing. You know, there's the mountains way ahead of me still, but I've walked a bit along this path, and I think that the thing that I would say is that there is this natural state when you are actually realise you are none of these things. You are just like the wood on this floor. You are actually empty. Your natural state, the natural way that you are, is stillness, is silence, is ease. Life, a tree doesn't make any effort. It just draws the nutrients and the water from the soil, and it grows, expresses, it gives fruit as the sun comes, drops its leaves, it returns. There's no effort involved in the tree. The tree just does what it's programmed to do. And in a lot of ways, we're just the same. We are expressions of all of these things. Everything that you identify as is not you. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy it and get engaged with it and all of those things, but they're not you. You are a still point of awareness. You are like a mirror on the world. And when you come into that awareness that you are pure awareness, and you're not attached or identified with anything else, you just see with that clarity, then there's peace. There's no struggle, there's no need for anything else. There's no right, no wrong, no I want more or I need less. I mean, the need just doesn't mean your stomach's not going to still rumble, and you might think, yeah, I'm getting signals that food is required for this body to survive. But the suffering, the mental overlay isn't there. You function as a human being in a much, much more natural way, without all that stress and hassle, or much less of it, because it's a journey, it's a process. On the first evening of our retreat this weekend, when Dyson, Zen master, turned up, he suddenly turned and went, "Oh, I think I've left my iPhone in the car, in the taxi." Oh well. Somebody then went off and rang every taxi company in Bournemouth, and eventually it was tracked down, and they came back and said, "Oh, we've got all your taxi. The thing is coming." It's, "Oh, that's nice." Come and go. Doesn't. I mean, it wasn't.
I lost one. It sounds really bad. I still put it back. I lost one of my mum's old vintage bags when she was younger, that she gave to me, and I just left it in the taxi with my old ID in it. This was back in September. But everyone was just and I was just so drunk, and everyone was just like, "Are you not really annoyed or stressed?" And I was like, "Well, there's nothing I can do about it." And I just did not batter an eyelid. I rang them the next day, because that's all I could do to get hold of them. And I didn't have it, but I just didn't care, because there's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Are you not stressed?" I was like, "Well, no, because it's not going to get the bag back."
No, absolutely.
It's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. So you feel better. Panicking would just make you feel awful, wouldn't it? So, doesn't mean you don't go and apologise to your mother for losing her, isn't it? But do you know what I mean? That you can still sort of express the right emotions and things, or apologies, or act appropriately. But you're getting caught up in the emotional turmoil of it won't serve anybody any purpose, any function. So yeah, no, exactly. Right. So, week 4, we're still doing sitting with counting breath. All ready for that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll do another one of
I
those.
feel like I'll end up laying down. I can't lie.
If you wish to lie down, you can.
I'm terrified I'm going to lose feeling again. It was so terrible.
You can just sitting on a chair if you prefer.